Hey guys, I bought a Sound Blaster sound card for only $3. It was so cheap, well, couldn't help myself and I bought a second one. These sound cards are well known in the retro PC community, but generally avoided because of the lack of a dedicated FM chip. However, if you stick to games from 1992 onwards, these are hidden gems. They are cheap, readily available. Under Windows, they can do 16-bit and 48 kHz with a really clean signal, but it's DOS where they really shine. So firstly, they are compatible with the Sound Blaster 16 standard. So in some games, you can select 16-bit samples, 44 kHz. Let's check it out.
0, 0, 0.
They also come with general MIDI support under DOS with a rather nice sounding wave font. I've loaded the 8 MB wave font on this card and tested a few games. So that sounds absolutely lovely, and you know what else sounds lovely? Our channel sponsor PCBWay. A one-stop shop for your projects. They do printed circuit boards, manufacturing and assembly, but also CNC machining, 3D printing, sheet metal fabrication, injection molding and more. Check the video description for links and more information. And to make things even more interesting, these sound cards have hidden talents. For example, they support digital out, but not just under Windows, even fully working under MS-DOS, so that's including digital speech as well as the general MIDI synth. The drivers also have an unsupported feature to stream Redbook CD digital audio over the IDE bus, and apparently it's a little bit flaky, but I had good success in some games, and again, it's a feature that most other sound cards do not have. And we have to be honest, for late 1980s game, these sound cards are not suitable because of the lack of FM. But from 1992 onwards, games like Doom, Sam & Max, The Seventh Guest, they will sound absolutely lovely because they support general MIDI. So let's begin by taking a close look at this sound card. Here we go. This is the sound card. We've got a model number up here. It's a CT4810. This is a Creative Labs card, but it is based on the Ensoniq AudioPCI. Game port and MIDI interface. This is the audio out, microphone input and line input. The line input doubles as rear out if you configure the card for quad speakers. We have 3 headers here: telephone answering device, CD in and aux in. You can see on this card there is a chip missing here, so I bought a second one, and this version, it's got the same model number, but yet there are differences. So this chip is present, it's an amplifier chip, and there's a setting of jumpers here, and these jumpers let you configure between line out and amplified out. It's not a big loss that this card doesn't have that chip, so if you see one, don't worry about it. You're much better off with the line out signal anyway. Now to get digital out going, I used such an adapter which converts from 3.5mm on the audio out to RCA, and then one of these is now coax, so you need a 75 ohm cable, and then I used this little nifty gadget which converts from coax to optical audio and then straight into the RetroTink 4K for capturing for this video. And now let's fire up our Retro PC. I will show you how to install the drivers and configure the sound card to get the most out of it. Now, finding the right drivers for these sound cards can be a bit of a pain, and that's maybe another reason why these aren't used more often. I had all sorts of issues trying the same driver disk on different systems, failing on one, working on another one. So I found a process that worked much better for me, and I will share that with you now. Right out of the gate, I can already spot a small issue. If you look at the center of the screen on the PCI device listing, we can see a multimedia device with interrupt 11. That's our sound card, but the serial bus controller also uses interrupt 11. We can go into the BIOS, select PCI configuration, and here we can see USB interrupt. Now for this project, I'm not using USB at all, so we can disable this. If you are using USB and in general you don't want shared interrupts with your sound card, then you need to put the sound card in a different PCI slot, reboot the machine, and make sure no interrupts are shared. There you go, the serial bus controller now shows no interrupt, and we can proceed with installing Windows 98. We are on the Retro PC, and now I'm gonna install the drivers in a way that has really worked well for me. There are two aspects. The first one are the web installer drivers. They will give us drivers for Windows 98 as well as working DOS drivers in the DOS prompt. So when you run games from in Windows, but they are missing some Waveset files, and they're also missing the drivers for MS-DOS mode. So for those, you need to go to my website and download the DOS driver directory and unzip it onto your hard drive. So let's begin with the Windows drivers first. Product registration, let's go cancel, do not remind me again, press OK, and we do a reboot. The sound is already working. There are a few little tweaks that we need to carry out. The first one is we've got the volume control in the taskbar missing. It's back now. Then click on Advanced Properties, Performance, and move this slider for the sample rate conversion quality to Best. Press OK. Next, we need to go into Device Manager. Click on Properties, Device Manager. Here are all the devices. Open the sound, video, and game controllers, and then double click on the legacy device. Click on Resources, and I don't know why this is happening, but it has happened on every machine for me. It's choosing high DMA 7 for the Sound Blaster 16 emulation. So we want to change that. Tick this box, double click on this one, change that to 5, press OK, OK, yes, close, and a reboot. And now I want to show you how I tune the mixer to have a really quiet background noise. We will listen to this wave file here, and then I will be quiet. I will boost the background noise to hear all those details. There you go, and now we'll do the same thing, but I will mute all these analog inputs and we will see if there's a difference. Under Windows, this sound card is already pretty decent. It can do stereo, 48 kilohertz, and 16 bits. It has compatibility, basic compatibility with A3D and EAX, but nothing on the level of a Sound Blaster Live, Audigy, Audigy 2ZS, or something like an Aureal Vortex. So this sound card for Windows games, it's best used for the early ones that don't use 3D audio acceleration. Before we look at the driver options, I want to point out one of the best documentations I've seen in a long time. So if you go to Program Files, Creative Audio Help, here is a help file. So let's open it up. And when I browsed through this document, I was impressed. This is one of the best put together manuals or user guides I've seen in a long time. So we're just gonna quickly skim through this one. What is Sound Blaster PCI 128? Why PCI? Main features, the configuration of the Sound Blaster PCI 128. The Waveset is explained. Locking the MIDI Waveset, what the heck is that? Legacy emulation, what is a MPU 401? There's a setting to allow interrupt sharing. The joystick port is covered. The output mode, analog or digital. The digital output is explained. 3D audio, PCI resources, configuring the legacy device. That's exactly what I did earlier. Changing the basic configuration. Disabling the driver. Using the Sound Blaster in Windows, in the MS-DOS prompt and in MS-DOS mode. It talks about how DOS start batch file is launched when you're shutting down into MS-DOS mode. It covers the set blaster and the set SBPCI environment variables, config.sys, DOS start batch file, tips for installing games, choosing the best sound option in a game, music options, digital audio options. Here it covers MS-DOS utilities. We will check them out later. SB test utility, SB legacy utility, SB config utility, SB mixer for DOS, the MT32 executable, some troubleshooting tips, configuration, how to use 2 sound cards if you want, and it just goes on and on with really good tips. So I was really impressed, and I do recommend you spend some time reading this document. To configure the sound card, you need to go into the device manager, double click on this device, and then click on settings. The web installer drivers that we loaded only come with the 2 megabyte Waveset. There are 2 more with 4 and 8 megabytes. We can add them by clicking the Add Waveset button. Then we navigate to C and DOS driver, and here are the options. I will choose the 8 megabyte version. In a short moment, we will compare the differences, listen to some recordings in the game Doom. This option here means it will preload the entire Waveset into memory, avoiding any skipping or latency issues. If you don't need DOS compatibility, you can untick this box. Under Windows, you can configure the MPU 401 MIDI output. Will it either use the internal synthesizer or the external MIDI port? For example, you can connect a Yamaha or Roland sound canvas through the game port. I changed that back to internal synthesizer. Allow LPT interrupt sharing. I leave that on. I always make sure that the system is configured without interrupts getting shared. I don't need a joystick port at the moment, so I will untick this one. Output mode. This affects the audio output on the sound card. AutoSense, it tries to figure out what you're trying to do, but if you know you're going to use digital, set it to digital. If you know you're going to use analog, set it to analog. Let's say you want to go digital. You have an option here. You can only have digital sources. That means the sound card will only route digital sources through the output. For example, Wave, the MIDI synthesizer, but nothing analog, no CD input, no telephone answering device. So I switched that back to analog and digital sources, that one back to analog, and then we've got some information here, and under 3D audio we can choose between stereo speakers and headphones. press OK, and then we might need to do a reboot. The sound card does support quad phonic speakers, and the way you need to hook up your speakers is the line in will become your rear speakers. So this is quite nifty. This is an early technology of surround sound before this whole 5.1 and Dolby Digital technology came about, and worth checking out if you want to have a surround sound speaker experience. And now let's compare these different Waveset files. Now earlier I mentioned we're going to use Doom, but I changed my mind. I will go for Descent because the setup program makes it really easy to compare. So let's start with the 2 megabyte version. So I'm curious as to what you think of the differences between these Waveset files. There are some discussions online. To my ears, the 2 megabyte version, I can hear a clear difference between the 2 megabyte version and the other two. Between the 4 and the 8, it's really difficult to hear much of a difference. So I'm just gonna go with the 8 megabyte version for peace of mind, and it sounds lovely. And with the web installer drivers in the MS-DOS prompt, many games will already work really well. We can see the set blaster variable here, address 220, interrupt 5, low DMA 1, high DMA 5, address 330 for general MIDI, and T6 indicating this is a Sound Blaster 16. But of course, to improve compatibility with DOS games, you want to restart into MS-DOS mode, and I will show you next how to use the DOS drivers. To configure the DOS driver, we will need to know the resources that the system assigned to the PCI card. So under Windows, this is really easy. We are dealing with interrupt 11, and the base address is B000. Now, what if you don't have Windows? Well, there's also a way. We can see the interrupt in this table. This is right after turning on the computer. So the multimedia device has an interrupt of 11. To figure out the base address from DOS, we need to use another utility. The utility is called PCI config. Run the command like this, PCI config, and then asterisk, which will probe the system for all PCI devices. And then we want to send the output into the PCI text file. And then we open this text file to have a look. And then we scroll down until we find information on our sound card. Should be right about here. There you go. The Ensoniq AudioPCI, which, well, Creative Labs bought Ensoniq and then rebranded it as an Sound Blaster PCI 128. And here's the base address, B000. And now we can configure the DOS drivers. Let's edit the Sound Blaster PCI.ini file. Under PCI port, this is the base address that we identified earlier. And PCI interrupt was 11. MIDI port 330, Sound Blaster port 220, that's all fine. Interrupt 5, that's fine. Low DMA 1, high DMA 5 is also fine. And here we have some interesting switches. There's a little bit of information up here. So this one toggles self-config, this one toggles Sound Blaster emulation, enable, and this one toggles the joystick port. This one is undocumented. It gives us the ability to stream Redbook music over the IDE bus. That's amazing. I'm not aware of any other sound card having this feature, but it's a little bit buggy, I've been told. So actually, let's give this a go. I will set that to true, and then we're gonna save the file, and then we're gonna run the Sound Blaster PCI 128 batch file again. And we can see the optical drive is being mentioned here. So yeah, that's promising. keyboard enable. I'm actually not quite sure what that does. Down here we've got settings for the mixer, but there's a little DOS utility that we can use instead. Here we can set the digital output mode that even applies for DOS. That's something I do want to check out later in this video. And down here you can configure the Waveset. We are going with the 8 megabyte version. And now we save the file and exit. And then we launch the batch file that I put together. It's Sound Blaster PCI 128. There's another utility worth checking out, the Sound Blaster test utility.
Testing digital audio. Testing digital audio.
The Sound Blaster mixer looks like this. We can control the volume for wave. I usually like to turn that down a little bit. Next one is the synth. This is for general MIDI. I like to max it out. CD stays muted. And there's a little toggle for the MT32. I will talk about that a little bit later. Save as default and exit. We can tick MT32 in the mixer or run this executable. Now, this feature is not very useful. All it does is it will map the default Roland MT32 instruments, but not many games actually use that. I'm aware of only 2 games, The Secret of Monkey Island and Loom, and both games typically are speed sensitive, so the chances you will run it on a machine that can be slowed down enough with a PCI sound card are quite slim, so it's not really a very useful feature. And now let's test the digital output, SPDIF. Let's change this to 1, and then we go File, save the file, exit, and then we run our batch file. We can see the confirmation output mode is now digital. And then I'll go into the RetroTink 4K options. There's a setting for the audio input, and we're gonna change from the analog to digital. Now you might think when I say you should focus on games from 1992 onwards that, well, this is a little bit restrictive in the amount of games that you can play. But this is actually another point I want to make. Something I see a lot in the retro PC community. A focus on having a huge library of games on your hard drive and then looking for games that don't work and complaining and then seeking out a really expensive sound card that hopefully does it all. Now, if you just relax a little bit, pick a few select games and actually sit down and play them, you will have such a blast with this sound card. I mean, games like Doom, Doom 2, Descent, if you actually sit down and play them, you will be busy for hours, if not weeks. So guys, what are my thoughts on this sound card, which is the Sound Blaster PCI 128? It's a rebranded version of the Ensoniq AudioPCI. I really like these cards. They are cheap, readily available, and with the right games from 1992 onwards, you can have so much fun. We get Sound Blaster 16 compatibility, a decent general MIDI device. It supports digital out in Windows and in DOS, and an unsupported feature, Redbook audio streaming over ID. That is absolutely amazing. Now, should you rush out and buy these, maybe paying a premium because of fear of missing out on eBay? No, you don't really have to, because if you already have a Sound Blaster Live or an Audigy, those cards can do the same thing and a little bit more even. The point of this video was mostly that there are still bargains out there. If you look a little bit outside of the mainstream and most popular sound cards, and yeah, but being a little bit selective with your games, you know, not stressing too much about trying to get your entire 7000 DOS library to work on your retro PC. Just pick 10 games or so and actually sit down and play them. You will have a really good experience. So all in all, these sound cards give you cheap fun for the right games and for the right people with the right mindset. And yeah, I think they do deserve a little bit more love and attention and a second look, and hopefully this video helps achieving that. So guys, there you go. That was my review on the Sound Blaster PCI 128 and also all of the multiple versions of the Ensoniq AudioPCI, which should also work with these drivers. If you've used this sound card before, what are your thoughts? What are your experiences? The recordings you listened to in this video, what is your take? Leave your comments down below, and thank you for watching, and I shall see you soon with another one.